DVB, Digital Fast.
Well, thank you very much for your interest in Myanmar, often called a forgotten conflict, so it's very important that you have keep this situation in the news, and it's a matter, obviously, of concern, should be, to the international community. Our mechanism was established by the Council with the mandate to collect evidence of the most serious international crimes committed in Myanmar since 2011 and analyze that in order to facilitate criminal prosecutions in national or international courts. When we were created, it was largely in response to the Rohingya crisis and the long history of civilians suffering in the conflicts in Myanmar. But what wasn't anticipated at the time was the 2021 coup, which has led to a great increase in violence and the suffering of civilians in Myanmar. So our work is concentrated on these two different main aspects. What has happened to the Rohingya since in 2012, 2016, 2017, and ongoing conflict in Rakhine State, and also the violence related to the post-coup situation and the conflict between various armed forces opposed to the military junta and the military forces. One of the areas that we're concentrating on is, because of the suffering that's happening in Myanmar, are the airstrikes that are occurring. And we note in particular there are many airstrikes hitting schools. Children are often the victims of these airstrikes, and also hospitals. So our team is collecting that evidence of where it has occurred, the kind of munitions that are used. We're looking at the command structure and how the orders would be given for such airstrikes. We're also very concerned, of course, with crimes in detention. Tens of thousands have been arrested since the coup. In detention, we have collected testimonies of individuals who talk about torture, seeing it, or themselves being the victims of it, and sexual violence in detention. And that's another area where we're collecting evidence in order to share it with courts that may have the ability and the willingness to exercise jurisdiction over those offenses. We rely very much on brave individuals who are willing to talk to us and share their testimonies. We've collected information from over 1,600 sources. We try to make every effort to keep our interactions as safe as possible, but we know that these individuals are taking risks to speak to us, and we're very grateful to them for their willingness to do so. We're not a court, we're not police, so we depend upon courts and judicial authorities taking an interest in our case and having the willingness to prosecute the cases. So far, we're sharing evidence with three distinct entities: the International Criminal Court, which has an investigation about the Rohingya in 2017 and earlier violence against the Rohingya. We know that back in November of 2024, the ICC prosecutor announced a request. He was requesting an arrest warrant for Min Aung Hlaing. We're also sharing evidence with the Federal Prosecutor's Office in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, which has responded to a complaint filed by Rohingya victims living in the UK and in Bangladesh with no connection to Argentina. But the Argentine courts have said because the allegations are crimes against humanity, it means just that. And under the Argentine Constitution, they said there's an obligation to investigate. So we've shared our evidence with the Federal Prosecutor's Office in order to enable them to conduct an investigation. And then finally, we shared a great amount of evidence in our analysis with the parties at the International Court of Justice. That case is a little different. It's not a criminal case, a civil case, where the Gambia has alleged that as a signatory to the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, that Myanmar, another signatory, has violated its obligations. You all know that in January, the court held hearings where it discussed the evidence. There was quite a lot of discussion about evidence and analysis that we had provided to the court. And it's been reported that the court is hoping to issue a decision on the case this year. We continue to look for other opportunities to share our evidence, including looking at is there a possibility that those that are providing the means for crimes from outside Myanmar could be in violation of national laws, such as sanctions or possibly money laundering, by providing weapons and materials that are fueling the conflict. So we've been in discussions with national authorities in several jurisdictions at an early stage about potential investigations in those countries. Well, the processes are quite distinct, and I don't think it would be possible to bring them together. So the International Criminal Court and the Argentine investigation involve individual criminal responsibility. They look at whether individuals have contributed to a crime under international law. While the International Court of Justice is looking at, has the state of Myanmar violated its obligations under the Genocide Convention? I think that all these processes are important even at this stage, even if there is obviously going to be, if there was indictments, there's obviously an issue about how do you make arrests. But it's very important, I think, these processes to keeping the matter before the public, before the international community, reminding people about what has happened, reminding other potential perpetrators, the conflict is still going on, that someone is watching, that those who commit such crimes could be held to account. And we've often had this debate about whether having criminal investigations under international law is conducive to peace or not. And in many other contexts where initially people thought, well, no one will ever be arrested, it complicates the process, it's turned out not to have been an impediment to peace negotiations. So Charles Taylor was indicted when he was president of Liberia and involved in peace negotiations. Eventually he resigned and was eventually brought to justice some years later. The Khmer Rouge were in the process of surrendering. The court was created to try those most responsible for the Khmer Rouge crimes. So I think there are many other instances also where international criminal justice, I think, has contributed, has not impeded peace processes, and I think arguably has contributed to the ability of victims to see some measure of justice for what's happened to them. Well, to be clear, we're not looking at state responsibility for supplying weapons. We're looking at whether there's a potential criminal prosecutions in these states. And in these states, so far, it's individuals. And in very few states, it may be possible to prosecute a corporation, but generally, criminal prosecutions are limited to individuals. So we'd be looking at whether individuals who may be part of a corporation or business have provided the means for the crimes. And it's possible to hold them responsible under aiding and abetting under international criminal law if you can show that they knew that they were making a contribution to the crimes and still continued that. But to be honest, that is very difficult to prove. What may be easier is to show violations of national laws about sanctions, about what kind of material is allowed to be provided to the state in question. So those are the kinds of matters that we're examining and looking at along with a few national jurisdictions, judicial officials in national jurisdictions. In regards to your second question about the scam centers, thank you very much for that. I mean, obviously, I think the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, the Special Envoy of the Secretary General said last year, I think, that scam centers that Myanmar is now the world's #1 source of international crimes, drug dealing and scam centers. And the scam centers are obviously of great concern. But for it to fall within our jurisdiction, we need to find evidence that these scam centers are contributing to international crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, or war crimes. So we're certainly looking to see if that evidence exists, but I would not say right now that we're examining the scam centers. We've collected evidence about allegations of serious crimes from a number of different groups, and that includes PDFs or other groups opposed to the military regime that are battling the military regime. I agree with you, it's very difficult sometimes to describe the chain of command or the exact characterization of what is a PDF as opposed to an allied or just another opposition group. But we have, for example, also reached out to the National Unity Government about one crime that we knew that they had investigated. We asked them to share their investigation with us, and they did so, which we're very grateful for that kind of cooperation. We've also reached out to other armed groups about allegations of crimes that we've seen or videos we've seen posted online that show things like executions of soldiers. They haven't been as cooperative with us in providing information. And of course, we've reached out multiple times, dozens of times, to the Myanmar military, seeking information from them, and they have never cooperated with us. That is an allegation that we're investigating. That's correct. The allegation is that the military bombed detention facilities where some of its own soldiers and their families were present, and we're collecting evidence to determine the truth of that. In regards to the airstrikes, of course, if it is an airplane, it's the military. The military is the only force that has airplanes in Myanmar. But you're also correct, of course, that some opposition have used drones. There's one strike in particular, drone strike, where we're looking where there are allegations that it was an armed group that was responsible for the attack, and we're collecting evidence in order to examine those allegations. This is a very difficult process to try to collect evidence and hope for criminal prosecutions around the world for crimes in a country that's in the midst of a very serious civil conflict. But we think it's still very important that victims know someone is collecting evidence. Someday there may be justice for what has happened to them, and also that potential perpetrators know, again, someone is watching, someone is collecting evidence. You can't be sure that you won't be prosecuted if you commit the crime that you're contemplating. So thank you again for your interest.